So, thanks for coming along. I'm going to be talking about creating D3 components. I'm going to assume everybody's heard of D3. Stick your hand up if you've built something with D3. Okay. What about D3 v4? No. Good. I'm not the only one. All right. I've got a confession about that coming up later, but we'll get to that. So I'm going to be talking about D3, what it is, what you can use it for, what it's good for. I'm going to be talking about a core concept in D3 called data join. Why it's important to kind of step back and learn that, because it's maybe not intuitively how you think about these kind of frameworks. I'll also talk about how you go about creating components with D3, because it's very easy to basically end up with a big mess, a big long procedural lump of D3 if you're not careful. And I will mention a little bit about kind of where I picked up the experience with D3, which is a project called D3FC. So first up, D3, the basics. So for those who aren't aware, D3 is kind of, I suppose in one sense, and certainly for D3 version 3, it is an all-encompassing library. It's something a lot more like jQuery of old than kind of the more modern modularized libraries. So as with any jQuery-esque abstraction, it has a kind of DOM selection ability. So here we select by an ID, and we then select the div, and then we select all of the nodes with a particular class name inside it. I'm sure you're all familiar with that kind of stuff. There's no point in being able to select nodes if you can't manipulate nodes. So as you'd expect, here you've got setting in the inner text, setting attributes, styles, looping over elements, and also adding elements to the DOM. So far, so good. And again, if it's a jQuery-esque abstraction, you expect to be able to get feedback from the DOM, so you get events. And again, you bind to them like so. And because it's quite an old framework, certainly in version 3, it's got an XHR abstraction. So fetch me some data from this URL, please. This is where it starts to get maybe a bit more interesting, a bit more into creating visualizations. It's got some support for animation in it, but again, it looks a little bit like jQuery. So you can transition stuff with the duration, set an easing function, and apply the transition. Where it starts becoming something maybe a bit different, a bit more unique, and to be honest, more useful, is in the way it manages to split out things like DOM manipulation from really quite complex abstract concepts like layout algorithms. So by a layout algorithm, I mean if you are trying to create a chart, then generally you've got an XY scale Cartesian chart, and you're going to want to position your data points in that chart. To do that, you need something to translate between the data domain, so from 0 to 1,000,000, and the, say, 500 pixels you've got to draw it in. That, as well as kind of labeling the axes, that's actually all handled in something that's completely standalone from rendering. So that's handled in a scale. So this is how you'd use a scale. You set the domain on it, in this case, so that's your data domain, so that's -10 to 10. You set your pixel range on it, so in this case 0 to 500, and it will then allow you to do the maths to go from a data domain to a pixel domain, and a pixel back to data. And then at the bottom, you can see it's got the kind of utility functions for extracting what's an algorithmically complex thing to do, which is retrieve some nice tick marks to add to the axis. You've also got more specialized layouts. So that's just a standard XY scale. You've got here a layout for doing a pie chart. So you give it some data, you tell it the gap between the pie chart elements, and it'll spit back kind of the data that you need in order to render a pie chart. Again, you've also, another bunch of functionality in there is some geometric primitives. So I've never used these, so I'm going to skip over them slowly. And then you've also got geographic projections, which I've never used either, so more complicated, I'll skip over them quicker. But cool, you can use lambdas. That's cool. That works in JavaScript now. There's no point splitting out all this kind of algorithmically complex stuff if you can't then do something useful with it. And if you say D3 to someone, they probably say it's something to do with SVG. And it is, so let's make it easy to go from the algorithms to an SVG rendered version of them. So an example of that is, whilst the scale did all the horrible calculations for transforming data, you actually want to ultimately render an axis. So an axis render in D3 looks like this. We construct the same scale as we did before. We then create an axis and pass it the scale. So it uses the scale for all the algorithmic side of things. And then we kind of tell the axis component to render into a weighting SVG element. As well as, I suppose, quite complex things like that, you've also got path data generators. So if you want to draw a complex shape in SVG, you generally draw it as a path. And you then need to give this horrible expression of different different drawing instructions. It's a pain in the neck to generate that manually with concatenation. D3 does that for you. So you give it an array of points. So you give SVG line an array of points, and it will give you the SVG path instructions to draw them. And again, you can see the use of it down at the bottom. Interestingly, you can also start to see some of the kind of unique features of D3. So here, we created the line component up here, and then we've kind of just passed it there. By default, things in D3, when you call them on, when you use them like this, they're passed the data, the weighting data, bound to a selection. So in that case, we've pre-bound the data on the line above, and that's starting to flow through. And that's one of the key concepts in D3. You've also got this, because it's a huge all-encompassing library, this lump of other. So you've got data and time, date, time formatting. As you'd expect. Useful if you're drawing a date-time chart though, time series chart. And a whole bunch of other stuff. So far so good, hopefully, but quite dull. This is what you can kind of build with D3. So this is a multi-series line chart. It's just a chart, it's not very exciting, but I mean, it kind of proves that D3 can make a chart. You can make kind of more exciting looking stuff. So this is something you might not expect to be in kind of a chart drawing library, but it's kind of, I don't know what you call it. It's got collision detection and a bit of a physics model going on in there. And that's something that's kind of built into D3 as well. So that's quite cool, you can make that. All right, and you can also make this kind of weird crap. So I'm not sure why you would want to. Oh, come on. There we go. And it does this. And that's a useful thing you can make with D3. So that's D3. D3 is DOM abstraction. It's got some layout algorithms in it. So that's the algorithmically complex side of things. It's got some SVG helpers in there, which help you go from the algorithms to a rendered SVG. And it's got MISC, as we saw. A key part of it that I didn't touch on is it's a library for doing DOM stuff. It's got to have some kind of data binding logic going on in there. And so its version of data bind is called data join. Now, to introduce you to data join, I'm going to do it with the help of, an example. And this example contains spoilers. So this is the USS Missouri. Two people get it. Okay, so we're going to start with some HTML. What we're going to try and render is the USS Missouri crew list. So we've got a header, a list, 3 empty list items. We've got some data. There you go. I'm a JavaScript meter, don't have to explain that one. And as with any data binding, what we want to do is we want to take some data and we want to take some DOM nodes and we want to kind of mash them together. So, this all takes place in a render loop. This is something important in D3. Operations on the DOM are kind of idempotent. So it starts to be a little bit like React kind of virtual DOM. You can call render as many times as you want. It doesn't change the output. It's a bit more clunky than that, but it predates React by quite a way, so give it some slack. So yeah, this all happens in an animation loop. Right, so first part, we want the DOM nodes. So to grab the DOM nodes, select the UL, select all the LIs in there, got the DOM nodes. Now we obviously had the data from before, we want to do the join. So how do we do that? Got the DOM nodes, there's the data. So select all the LIs, bang it together, the data. Easy. The result of that is called the update selection. And there's no point munging the nodes together if you then don't do something with it. So let's use the update selection to set the inner text of the elements. So for every node that was associated with a data item, we're going to kind of take the data item's name and their rank and display it as the inner text. All good. We get the output. Brilliant. It's all worked. So that was take first data item, take first DOM node, combine them, second data item, second data node, combine them, third data item, third DOM node, put them together. Right. All's good until this guy turns up. So this guy, so he's a new guy to add to the roster on the ship. So we want to add an item to the data. So we shove a new item in the data. And then we look at the DOM. And the DOM hasn't changed. That's kind of counterintuitive. We expected to see Stranix turn up at the bottom. He hasn't turned up at the bottom. Where is he? Well, if we think about it, in terms of that joining before, we started with 3 empty list items. And so we had 3 DOM nodes and 3 data items, and it bound them together and it was all good. What we've got now is 4 data items and 3 DOM nodes. So it's bound the first 3 fine, but then it's got this kind of this dangling one. So we haven't told D3 what to do in this case. So to do that, we use the enter selection. So we say whenever you come across a data item for which there is no DOM node equivalent, just shove the appropriate DOM node in there. So li. So now when we do the data join, do the 3 as per usual, and then we spot there's an extra one required, and we enter, we stick it in. Woohoo! All good. Now, when Stranix joins, this is the spoiler, sorry, he goes and kills the captain. So captain's dead, he's no longer in the roster, he's gone from the data, and we've got to change the DOM when we do the data join, but that's not what we were expecting. So we got Krill at the top, we should, that's what we want. We got Ryback second, Stranix third, fine, but then we've still got this last DOM node. We haven't got rid of it, that's what we'd expect to happen. Well, again, thinking back to how D3 does it, first data item, first DOM node, second, third. Now it's got a DOM node, but it doesn't have a data item. Like, what should it do? You just got to tell it what to do. So use the exit selection to do that. And there you go. If you ever come across a DOM node for which there's no data item, just remove it. And there we go. Change. It's all good. That's what we were looking for. And then more spoilers. Ryback wins. Always bet on Steven Seagal. So, data join. That's an idempotent transformation of data into nodes. Now, I'm going to bail on doing a live demo because this thing's really springy. And jump straight over to talk about components. So whenever you create something in D3, especially if you go out there and you try and learn it by looking at other examples, the examples that you find tend to be really long walls of code. There's nothing very functional going on in there. There's not very much componentization going on in there. We found that quite hard to kind of build anything maintainable and reusable with. So we had to look somewhere for inspiration as to how to do this, and the place we looked was D3 itself. How does D3 produce the components that you use? So first up, components, they're just functions. So JavaScript, unit of reusability, is a function, same in D3. So these two are two pretty lame components, we could call them. One which sets the inner text of a selection, and the other which sets the style of a selection. And we can select some DOM nodes and then apply it. Now, that will do what we want, assuming we wanted that. But it doesn't look very D3 anymore. We've kind of lost some of the D3 fluent syntax. So what we can do is, without changing any of the functions have stayed exactly the same, we can use call. So call is a function built into D3. You can call it on a selection, and it will invoke that code, passing the selection as an argument to the code. So starting to look a bit more D3. That's nice. I suppose the next thing you want to do in order to emulate the built-in D3 components is to allow those components to be configurable. So for the components to be configurable, you need to create instances of the components. You don't want a global instance of the component. So this is the last time I'll use Java terminology, I promise. This is a factory, but it's just a function again. It returns another function. So we invoke the factory to get our instance of the component, and then we call the instance of the component. So now we've got an instance, we just want to make it configurable. So we do that. In this case, we're trying to make the quote configurable. So the quote becomes just something that we hold within the instance. We've used closures to capture that quote variable, and we need to expose a way for that to be configurable. And this is basically how D3 does it. It's the code you would write if you came to do it yourself, I suppose. There's no helpers to do it. It's just plain JavaScript. So accept a value. If there is no value specified, return the current value. Otherwise, apply the past value and return the current instance. And just by doing that, you end up with that fluent chain syntax. So here's us using it, and you can see that now it looks like a D3 component. You can use it like a D3 component. So components are just kind of convention-based units of reuse. That's all there is to them. And it's just plain JavaScript. You're not using any D3 magic to create them. It's just JavaScript. So this time there's no bilking on this one. So here we have some D3 code that I wrote previously, and it's got an X scale, a Y scale. So we're trying to render a bar series. So we want to create a bar series component. So our component is up here. This is our bar series component. You can see we've got closure captured properties. So we accept in the X scale and the Y scale. That allows it to kind of be reusable for a number of different scales. And we also take in the height of the bar. So if we quickly look at what it should look like. There we go. So the height of the bar we specify as just a constant. And we've defaulted all these to the kind of the simplest versions of themselves, and we expect that these will be injected in. This is configuration of this bar series. Then you can see we've got kind of our boilerplate of a instance of our function that we create. We then do a selection.each to make sure it can work with multi-node selections. We do our data join from before. This time we're adding rectangles because that's what a bar looks like. We create a fill color from the category scale. So that just gives us nice pretty colors every time we ask for them. And you can see it just being used down here at the bottom, that we're setting the X, the Y, the width, the height. And in some cases, we're making use of the algorithmic side of things in the scales to do exciting stuff, like go from the pixel ranges to the data ranges. And we're also using the specialized scale, the category 10 one, to give us the colors. And there you've got the kind of the exit. Here we've got our configuration. So that's just the configuration of our component. And then quickly skipping down, this is how you would use the bar series. So you instantiate your component. You set an X scale and a Y scale on it up here. And you set bar height on it. You then apply some data to a selection and call the bar series. We'll call the instance of the bar series. You can kind of start to see how this this starts splitting up your code and giving you components and starts pulling your what can be one huge long block of code into kind of reusable chunks. Now, we found kind of this pattern works really well, and kind of we've actually started to build up our own like library of these components, and to kind of save other people doing exactly the same thing, that's kind of what we built D3FC for. So D3FC is basically just a toolkit for rapidly developing these kind of bespoke charts. So stuff that we find ourselves developing quite a lot in financial services are like time series charts, time series Cartesian charts, like navigators, that kind of stuff. The idea was, instead of building that from scratch each time for our customers, we just write it once and write it in kind of the D3 style, so it's dead easy to drop it in for anybody. And you don't have to make that choice between using D3FC or D3. D3FC, they're just D3 components. So they're just there to save you some time writing. Hopefully they're just the code that you would write yourself anyway. So yeah, embraces D3, small and composable, prioritizing simplicity. And at worst, I suppose one way of looking at it is, hopefully if you're trying to learn D3, it's a way of going and looking at it and just seeing like a curated and consistent set of examples, which is, I suppose, quite a big deal if you're trying to learn something new. We have a website, and it's got examples of kind of simple charts that you can build with our components. Yeah, something happened about 8 days ago. Mike Bostock, who created D3 and continues to maintain D3, he actually quit his job, about 12 months ago. He used to work at the New York Times. He did the data viz for their website, and that's kind of where D3 was born. And obviously, along with the help of some other collaborators, he created D3 to version 3. But then 12 months ago, he decided he wanted to kind of take a sabbatical from kind of nose to the grindstone and create D3 version 4. And helpfully, D3 version 4 has 5,000 commits in it, and he announced it 8 days ago. That kind of coincided with when I went on holiday. But yeah, so I mean, that alone wouldn't have been a problem. It's a very nice place to do work. This was more the problem. So I've had 7 days of that. Now, to give you guys an idea of the kind of the scale of version 4 as well, and how much change is involved. So he's very kindly done some release notes, so change log. So there's a few pages of release. Ooh, it's a lot of release. Yeah. So that's as much as I've really read about it. Hopefully, because he's been doing this for 12 months though. Because we've got D3FC, we've kind of been keeping an eye on his progress. He's been doing it all in public. So about 2 weeks ago, I actually upgraded the examples that we ran through before to use some of the new components from D3 version 4, because I suppose that's the big thing that's changed. Instead of it being one big monolithic library that you've got to drag in and does your XHR and everything for you, which you probably don't want these days. Maybe you want to use kind of React for rendering, I don't know, RxJS, talk to your back end. You just want to pull out some of the algorithms from D3. You don't want to be bringing in the whole thing. So it's very helpful that he's broken it down into modules. And yeah, so 2 weeks ago, I updated the examples to just pull in the modules of interest to recreate that particular example. Well, don't want to give him undue credit just yet. So, first things first, like modern web. So we're now doing, so I'm using JSPM, but basically we're embracing ES6 and kind of the new browser features. We're using system import to pull in our JavaScript, and then I'm doing a hack to allow something for the demo later. But that's kind of the first thing, that when he's modularized it, he's needed to kind of introduce some way of building his components. So he's obviously adopted as any sensible person would, ES6 modules. So the example, or the guts of the example from before. First things first, yeah, the modules at the top. So the modules are broken down roughly, actually, hopefully, by the categories that I talked about much earlier on. So selecting DOM nodes is now in the D3-selection module. Each kind of method is exposed independently, so you can get access to exactly what you need. So then you combine that with something like Rollup or JSPM, and more recently Webpack, and then it'll do the tree shaking for you, and you get down to the smallest nugget of JavaScript you need in your page, which can be important. As well as the selection library, we're also pulling in some scales from the scale library. So you can see how that distinction is now way more formal. It's not just a naming convention within D3. Selection's done over here. Scales, part of the algorithmic side, is done over here. Again, I've embraced ES6. So to kind of formalize our component pattern, we now kind of say that the configurable properties at the top are all lets. Everything else is a const. You can see, yeah, so that's subcomponents of consts. Now, whereas before we used the category 10 specific type of scale, now we kind of combine what's a color scheme with an ordinal scale, and that will kind of, the combination of those two gives us that same category 10 behavior that we got before. Again, we're using fat arrows. There's a slight change in that we were previously using this in here. This is now actually, well, it'll go, it's lexically bound when you do fat arrow syntax, so you can't use that anymore. But you've now got a node coming in at the end, and you just pull out the appropriate node. You get exactly the same behavior. Some other changes, yeah, we've just ES6ified our property syntax. Nothing too exciting there. I think people have seen it before. Because we're following that component syntax, we now import our components in exactly the same way as we're importing D3 components, which is nice. We've also obviously got this much more simplified set of dependencies. And again, here's how you use it. So our code's in a separate module now. It's much clearer. Pull it in when you need it. And so instantiate it, configure it as before, assign some data, and then kind of invoke the component. So in many ways, it hasn't changed significantly. Things have been renamed slightly, things have been pulled apart slightly. Like concepts that were overlapping before have definitely been teased apart from each other. But there is one place where there's a really major change that if you start putting your code over, that's going to bite you. So I'll quickly spend some time on that. And I know this because it bit me badly. So we ran through how data join works previously. So data join, you did your select all, you bound it to your data, and that kind of munged the nodes together. You then had your update selection, which worked for existing nodes and existing data and associated data items. You had your enter selection, which was for a data item which did not have a DOM node. And then you had your exit selection, which was for a DOM node that didn't have a data item. Update selection, exit selection, pick the easy one, hasn't changed. Still works exactly the same as before. Enter selection, if you take its explicit definition, it hasn't changed either. So it only leaves update selection. What previously used to happen was that when a new node was added as part of the enter selection, so when you appended, say, the list item in the example, you then didn't have to explicitly do anything to the newly added one. It would just form part of the update selection. So it would kind of magically jump from one selection to the other selection when you added it. So the enter selection was always implicitly part of the update selection. That has now changed. So to get the behavior that you would expect out of D3 from what you would come to it as from D3 version 3, you actually now need to run this line. So you just need to merge the update selection with the enter selection. So if you do that, you then get exactly the same behavior that you would expect before. So when you configure the update selection, it will automatically configure newly added nodes as well as nodes that were in from last time. The one other small thing worth mentioning is we were using the syntax previously where you passed an object to the attribute function, and the keys were the property names, sorry, the attribute names, and the values were the attribute values. You can't do that anymore. Lots of the overloading of methods argument types has been removed. So now it just to make their implementation simpler, therefore to reduce the size of the download for you. Those are available, but they've kind of been renamed and moved out into separate packages. So it's probably just as clear in your code to write that snippet and kind of write it out longhand. But if you want to keep with the old way, bear in mind you'll have to change it. I believe it's called ATDRS, but you'll also need an extra import at the top in order to do it. So that, in a nutshell, is kind of what's changed with D3 version 4. To give you an idea of how many things, not just in terms of how many changes have been made, but in terms of what's now available and how it's been split out. Ali, that man there, created this a little while ago, and helpfully is based off the kind of the most recent version automatically. And this shows you the dependency graph now of all of the D3 version 4 modules. So if we pick something, where's it gone? This initializes randomly each time, so bear with. So there you go, D3 selection. Nothing now depends on D3 selection. It depends on other things, but it doesn't. Nothing depends on it. So you've freed yourself from the DOM side of things if you don't want to be, if you don't want to drag that into your application. So for example, when you now bring in D3 force, which is what was used for the collision detection physics demonstration earlier, whilst it will bring in the dispatch and timer and collection, it won't bring in anything to do with selection. And you can see, yeah, there's a whole lot of different modules, all specializing in different stuff. So the stuff I knew nothing about, like the D3 Geo stuff, it's very cool, but it now lives over here, and I don't have to worry about it. So all good. So yeah, that's pretty much me. But just before I'm done, this was something that took up a lot of my time a long time ago. And this was the idea of what happens if you try and put D3 code into a tweet. What kind of stuff can you create if you kind of artificially constrain people? I'm sure you've seen JS Code Golf competitions elsewhere. So this is the idea of doing the same thing for D3. Now, turns out you can make some quite awesome stuff. So these are actually all GIFs. If I jump you to a real one, that's yeah. So it's like tweet size amount of code does something like that. It's pretty cool. This guy, I don't think he's got a real job. But yeah, you can kind of. It is D3 code. It's kind of vaguely recognizable if you know D3. So he's creating an ellipse. This is just an alias I added to make it possible to fit in a tweet. He's setting attributes, so the radius in the X direction, radius in the Y direction, setting a transform, and then using a couple of helpers. You've also got ES6 syntax to make things a bit more compact. And yeah, animating it and making pretty patterns. I got very excited about this kind of stuff. There was some very good ones. Yeah, I don't know. It's cool. It's like, so like at the start it was you could always look at the code and then see what they were trying to do. Whereas as time went on, you looked at the code and you had no idea what it was going to render as. I think some of these more recent ones are quite cool. Like, it's awesome. This one, I don't know. Some are good. Hang on. I think it was this one. Yeah, like that's a 3D cube. What? Oh yeah. And to prove it wasn't just all that guy, other people did occasionally do it. Thanks, whoever did that. Oh yeah, may as well do Joel in a tweet. Yeah, it's kind of. Anyway, so this, yeah. So I suppose, yeah, to round this off, I did this, and it kind of resulted in something I made kind of going viral in Japan, which was a really strange location for it. And so lots of tweets that I didn't understand anything. Probably lots of swear words all over the website. I didn't really know. But then also kind of me being included in probably the strangest taxonomy of things anything I've created has ever been involved in. So this is my website. They've managed to pick the shittest bits of it as well. These are chocolate mushrooms. That's the guy. What? Yeah. So yeah, I have no idea what that website's about. But yeah, there you go. It's real, and I'm sure if you go back far enough, you'll find it. But yeah, that was a magical mystery tour of D3. Thank you all for listening.
Was there anybody has any questions for Chris before we?
Hi. As someone who's made the transition from version 3 to version 4, would you say that for someone coming at it new, it's worth starting from version 3 and then following the same transition, or just starting straight from version 4?
Okay. I should probably be clear. We haven't completely made the transition. Well, I suppose we're maybe further along the journey towards doing it. So based on that, I would say if you Google for kind of any kind of blogs or tutorials or anything like that, everything you find at the minute will be version 3, which will make it incredibly difficult to, if it's not the easiest framework to get a hold of to start with. It's got some kind of unique concepts in it, like data join and what have you. There's lots of really good reference material out there on that, but if it was me starting, I would probably start with version 3, and then read that massive page of release notes to get up to speed. I think over time that'll change, but I don't think there's a real, unless you're trying to build something really high performance, that's probably the only time I'd skip straight to version 4 at the minute.
Any more questions?
I was just wondering what the browser support is like.
I suppose anything, well, version 3, it was anything and everything. Version 4, it's all going through roll-up. Pretty sure it'll be the ones that you care about. Is that a politically correct enough answer? I'm not sure, to be honest. I can find out and get back to you.
Any more for any more? No, thanks again. Thanks again to Chris.